you could earn 20% a year. You're talking about this. My friend would have been a billionaire. You could earn. Hi, welcome everyone. Dr. Anthony Cornelius IV here, also known as Dr. Finance, and I am here in my garage. Well, actually, not actually here in my garage. I'm actually here in my podcast studio, as you can see on the window. This is a little play inspired by Tai Lopez's famous video called "Here in My Garage," and this video is about a friend of mine who a story recently happened where he had a very, very expensive garage. And I had, after many, many years, he had asked me, told me his problems. He was just actually selling his garage. So 50 years in the making, at spending $2,100 a month. And the opportunity cost, which is the cost of what he could have did with something else, was as outstanding. And I wanted to just show him through this video. Now he has to be called not by his real name, so we'll call him Tim. So this is about Tim's garage, and in Tim's garage, kind of like Tai Lopez's garage, this guy's a multi-millionaire, but he's been storing stuff for 50 years that he never used. So cleaning out this garage recently was like awakening his spirit to really do soul searching, to look inside and see like all the things he really didn't need, which was most of the stuff. So this is funny because I thought it was a perfect opportunity to also talk about and demonstrate how many people have storage units and warehouses that they rent for long periods of time, just waste their money when they could have been investing in something else. Especially all they really needed to do was spend a weekend to go through it, or in his case, because it was 50 years, 3 months, and sort it out and throw all the stuff out they don't need and save so much money. But really, the highlight of this video is to quickly demonstrate. I'm not going to get into the complete details, and we can have a whole nother video on the math of this stuff. But I will, in a very short, simplified period, try to demonstrate how much money he actually lost on this in terms of opportunity cost. If he would have invested that same amount of money over 50 years, folks, get this. Here you go. The amount at 10% for 50 years, which is historically the stock market average, 10%, he would have had an astronomical number at $2,100 a month. It would have been $36,684,397.51. That's how much he would have had if he would have just invested in something some kind of investment at 10% a year for 50 years. And I was demonstrating to him this number, and he almost fell off his chair, because first I showed him the 4% number. At 4%, so made the same assumptions. The number was around 4 million. At 5% was around almost 6 million. But at 10%, just to push the percentage just a little bit more, and I got to that giant number that I just mentioned to you. So, folks, I'm going to walk you through the math real quick. And the bottom line of this is, folks, if you have a garage or a storage and you got a lot of stuff in here, and you got Lamborghinis and all this stuff that you don't use, consider how much money you could actually have invested in something in terms of value, monetary value, over that same amount of period. And most of the time, you don't know how long. He didn't know he was going to be here 50 years. He just knew it was going to be a few years, and it turned to 5 and 10 and 20, 50 years later. Some people might have just simple garages, right? And of course, maybe you don't have a giant garage like Tim, but you might have a simple 10 by 15 or 10 by 10 or 5 by 5 garage, maybe at a store or a storage locker at one of these storage facilities. Okay. And even if you kept it there for a year or 5 years or 10 years, then all that money could be kept when all you have to do is just go through and check to see if you really need it. Now, some people do need storage lockers, and I'm not playing that down, or warehouses. Some folks do. And if you're a billionaire, or you have money like Tai Lopez, maybe, or Jay Leno, you have a garage to store all your nice cars, and that's what you want to do, and that's your choice. All I'm saying is, in many cases, most people didn't think about, or didn't want to take the time to really reflect on the things that are actually piling up in that garage and hoarding, and it's costing them tons and tons of money, until the numbers awaken them the way I gave a rude awakening to my friend Tim when I actually showed him how much he would have had if his opportunity cost, the cost that he had, if he was to place that money into an investment. And if I think that if I met him 50 years ago and showed him that number before he made this decision, say, look, you can put everything in here and you'll be here for 50 years, or you can invest that into X investment at, let's say, 10%, and I'll give you a check for roughly $37 million in 50 years. Would you prefer that? If he really thought about it in the beginning, he might have actually just said, yeah, I don't need this garage. I don't need all this space, right? So let's walk through this real quick. I'm going to share my screen with you, but I just wanted to reflect on this scenario because a lot of folks have storage units, have garages out there, and are just hoarding stuff. There's a lot of hoarders out there. You know, I'm not going to get into the depths of psychology of hoarding, but I will get into the monetary aspects. We might not be able to argue about the hoarding psychologically. I will leave that for the psychologists. But from a financial standpoint, we can show in numbers what you're actually losing. So let's do that. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. All right, folks. So here we have a table on Excel. So going into breaking down Excel formulas is really beyond the scope of this conversation. I just want to show you that there's multiple ways of calculating this, and compound interest is what we're our tools, our levers that we're using here. Basically, it's money earning interest, and the interest on that interest, and that interest is earning interest as well. And what happens is an exponential effect. It's called compounding. The reverse of that is discounting, but compounding is when your money just grows, and it grows exponentially because the interest is earning interest on interest, right? So in this case, there's multiple ways to calculate this type of problem. This is actually what's called a future value of annuity problem. There's many ways. We're using Excel here, and even in Excel, there's multiple ways. So you can calculate it with Excel. You can do the old-fashioned way. Let's start with that, is manually. There's a written formula that definitely beyond the scope of this quick video, but then Excel has several ways you can do it. And of course, you can also use a handy calculator, one of my favorite calculators, HP 10B2 with a little dust on it. Okay, here we go, HP 10B2. And it's once you figure it out, there's actually the formulas at the top. I'll show you. You double check your work with this. So it's good to use multiple sources to make sure you got the right number. And of course, there's also financial apps out there where you can just type the numbers in here. But let's just work through this exercise here. So you should be seeing the screen if this worked out right. And so basically, all right, so if you look at the top here, you have N equals interest, N equal period, that's the time period, I is interest, P is present value, payment, and then future value. They're your five major values for calculating time value. These are called time value of money problems, okay? So in this case, it was 50 years, so we do put 50 there. Now, the interest is 4%. Now, folks, if you do Excel, here's a little trick that will save you tons of time. And, you know, I retired as a university professor 5 years ago, so even myself, I spent a half hour just trying to figure out what was going on today because I hadn't done it in so long. It was some simple little detailed things can really mess you up big time. I knew the answer was wrong because my other sources were saying it was, but if I didn't put the percentage in there and I just left the number the way it was, the number was like literally this big. It was taking up half the screen. I knew that was wrong. So you have to put the percentage, otherwise it doesn't think it's a percent. So I put 4%. Present value is 0. So we're assuming that when he started to pay his payment to the garage or the warehouse, actually, in this case, it was $2,100 a month. There was nothing else there. It wasn't starting out with anything. So we make that a negative number. And the answer, and then in this case, we hit the function tab and we input our data. Now, folks, because this is a monthly payment, here's another kicker. You got to divide it by 12. So I put you do the cell block F2 divided by 12. I'm sorry. Yes, for n, it's f2 divided times 12. That's to calculate the number of periods because it's 50 years, but 12 months. So 50 times 12 is 600 periods. Because we adjusted the period, we also have to adjust the rate. Now the rate goes the opposite way. We divide. So in this case, it's G2, that's cell block G2, divided by 12, okay? And it's 0.00 and then 3 pretty much to infinity. All right, so that's the interest rate per month. And there's 600 months in 50 years. So then the payment is negative 2,100 because we're paying out. It's negative. And there's no money. We're not starting with any money. So it's zero present value. We're calculating future value. We put 0 in because it's the end of the month. We start with the end of the month. And I'll explain that in a second. Hit OK. And boom, it calculates it. So I've already done the work for you. We can calculate this also on the calculator to double check this. And I'll do it real quick. And folks, you don't have to know the exactness of this right now. This is really just to show you, there's a little bit of a trust thing here. You have to trust in my numbers, but I can show you if you want to read my first book, Necessity of Finance. I actually have a section on time value of money and goes into compounding. I also plan on doing some more videos to really break this down for you. But here's another way to double check this. So on the calculator, I'm going to put 50 times 12. 50 times 12. I hit N. Okay, that's the N. That's the number of periods. And the interest rate, also known as R sometimes, they call it R. We're going to put 4 divided by 12. 4 divided by 12, hit the interest. And it's the same value, right? 0.33. Then we're going to put 0 and then present value. Then we're going to hit 2,100. Make that negative. Hit the payment button. And now we're going to calculate future value. All right, so see that? That number matches right down below. So we can do the same exact formula for every one of these, and we're going to hit the same thing. Okay, and I've already tested this, but I just want to show you that's how it works. These five buttons up here are basically the same functions. They're major functions when you're messing with time value money problems. And there's different ways to utilize these buttons depending on the type of problem. There's a lot of different styles of problems. But for this problem, this is a perfect match. Okay, so without getting into too much more detail, so as you can see, 4% is around 4 million in 50 years. He could have had about $4 million. At 5%, he could have had about $5,600. Now, 5% is usually what the banks used to pay as a short-term amount. Hasn't been that way since 2008, Great Recession. At least 15 years, it's been about 0% to 3%. So, but assuming normal times, since probably the interest rate was invented during the Renaissance era, it was always around 5% for relatively safer, somewhat long-term, short-term investments. Okay, short-term to intermediate investments. 10% has been the historical stock market average. You're taking a little bit of risk with that stuff, but over a period of time, assuming you had like an index fund or something, usually, most likely you probably would have got a 10%, depending when you started, rate of return. In his case, 50 years ago, yeah, you probably would have hit 10%. Now, can you get more? Oh yeah, you can definitely get more. And if you want to, so the main number here, folks, is $36,381. I'm sorry, $36,381,000, $220.67. If you would have made it, let's say 100%, basically doubled your money, this number gets ridiculous. Look at that. It just gets so crazy. If you would have made it 15%, let's see what happens. 289 million at 20% a year. If you could earn 20% a year, you're talking about this. My friend would have been a billionaire at 20% for 50 years at $2,100. He would have been a billionaire, almost $3 billion, just 20%. Folks, if you have a solid business, you can make 20%. Investments, usually around 10%, but in businesses, depending on the right business, I mean, you can make a lot more. I mean, there's certain businesses right now that are making 100% rate of return or more. It depends on where you're at. The average person usually is better just sticking it in an index fund and getting about 10% over the long term. Okay, something like that. But all I'm trying to highlight is there is a possibility you can earn more. And if he did earn 20%, I mean, he really would have been a billionaire. And look at the difference between 10% at 36 million and 20%. You become a billionaire, a multi-billionaire with just an extra 10%. It's just insane. So, folks, one other caveat I just want to add to this discussion is beginning versus end. It's an extra period, but in the beginning, when he first had his opportunity, when he first rented that garage, this warehouse garage, it was if he paid the $2,100 in the beginning of that month versus the end of that month, it changes things. It could drastically change things, depends on the interest rate, but it definitely adds more that he could have earned. Now watch, I already set this up for you. So by making it a beginning payment instead of an end payment, you can see in cell blocks J and 4 and J5 that there's a difference of roughly $300,000 just from moving one payment in the beginning of the month all the way in the beginning of this entire event, just by paying $2,100 up front instead of the end of that month, because it's an extra payment period. It's an extra payment. So he would have made an extra $300,000 at the end of 50 years. Not a big deal, but you know, it's just something to consider. Okay, one last thing before we conclude this is the average person who's renting a storage unit isn't like my friend Tim. Okay, they're not spending $2,100 a month for 50 years. But maybe you might have a simple unit where you're get a simple 10 by 10 or 10 by 15 block at a storage facility. They're becoming really big these days. So there's a lot of movement going on out there, a lot of transitioning, people moving from state to state, different jobs, especially in the virtual world. So let's just say, you know, a simple assumption, 1 year at 4%, you're paying $200 a month. It would be roughly $2,444.49 at the end of the year. Okay, not much more difference. I mean, think about $200 times 12. It's $2,400 a year you would have spent without any interest at all. But if you got a little bit of interest, you made about another $45 approximately, right? But compounding is not noticeable so much in the beginning. It's at the end. So over 10 years, though, over 10 years, it would have been, in a normal case, it would be 2,400 times 10 or 24,000 without any interest involved dollars that person would have had in their pocket. But with only 4%, you're actually talking $29,449.96. So roughly another 6,000, 5,500 or so. Okay, so still not much, but then again, it's only 4%. So if you were to rent a storage unit for 5%, it's a little bit more. It's relatively $31,000, $31,056.46. 10 years, 5%, $200 a month. Simple little, you know, little garage, little storage unit you're renting. Okay, at 10% over 10 years, okay, which is the typical long-term investment rate of return, generally speaking, for the average investor, average investment, I would say, average successful stock investment, could be real estate too. $40,969. All right. So these are little simple things in life, little simple decisions, which can add another $41,000 to your pocket in 10 years. Over the course of 20 years, $151,000. If you're like my friend Tim, 50 years, that's $3.5 million approximately. If you just would not have spent $200 a month on a storage that you probably could have cleared out, a 10 by 10 little unit, probably could have cleared out most of the junk. If you left it there 50 years, chances are you didn't need it in the first place. It's just sitting there and you're paying for it, right? So one other thing, and if you were to do it in the beginning instead of the end, start your first $200 pay in the beginning of the month, of the beginning of that event, instead of the end of the month. You made your first payment. You just started renting your storage unit in the beginning instead of paying at the end of the month. You pay in the beginning. It just changed it a little bit. So at the end of 10 years, at 10%, $41,310.40. Okay, and you can double check again all this with the calculator, or you can do it manually, which takes a while, but you can do it. It's definitely not only possible, highly probable you'll succeed. It's just a matter of time. Okay, but just for the sake of a simple little video, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. So again, take a quick look at this one more time. All right, and these are all cell blocks. So if you can actually click the function tab right here, and it shows how I came up with all these numbers. All right, and there's other ways to do this. Net present value is another way. We can actually just put in the cell block and type it in manually, hit the equal button, and then you put future value, parentheses, and then you start inputting the numbers. Okay. All right. So let me stop sharing this. And all right, to conclude, folks, knowledge is very important. Okay. So if you have a lot of books in your garage, but that's great. That's great. But if you're not using those books over 20, 50 years, knowledge is also costing you a lot of money. Knowledge is only valuable if it can be activated, if you can put that in use. Okay, so knowledge that's not put in use really has limited value. It's knowledge, when it's combined with action, that becomes power. Okay, so don't just keep those books in your garage and waste all that money. Keep that money so you can do something with that money for better things in the future. Whatever that may be, maybe charity. Maybe all that money could have gave to charity to help someone, help many people. Okay, so just think about that, folks. And I hope this video was helpful to you. So here in my very, very expensive garage, like that title, right? So again, maybe Ty Lopez or some other famous folks out there have garages. They can afford, if they can afford it, then and they want that, and they understand the opportunity cost that they're giving up for keeping that garage, and that's their own personal goals, right? But this video would be more helpful, I would think, to people who don't really understand what they're sacrificing by having all those things in their garage, especially that they're not using. The monetary value, like my friend Tim, for 50 years, basically just left all those things in his garage, and he could have had so much more money that he could have used to help people, because he's a very giving person. So I dedicate this video to you, Tim. Thank you so much for listening, folks. And let us know, comment, subscribe, and all that great stuff. If you're not already subscribed, I'm sure you're already subscribed. Everyone's subscribed, right? But comment and like the video, and let us know below in the comments if you enjoyed this and what other kind of videos you like. Let us know if this happened to you. If you have a storage unit that you are paying for, just wasting money, and you're so upset about it. I get the frustration. It's like when you do your budget and you realize all the things you could have knocked off your budget and that you're paying extra money for every month for no reason. It really can change your life by just going through those numbers one by one. And this is just one of those items. This is a whole video on just one of those items. A useless storage unit or a useless garage that you have, wasting space, right? You could have been on how many vacations with that? Took your family on a vacation and get some well-needed rest to make your next move. So thank you, folks. Don't forget to check out my books if you want to learn more about finance and things like what we're talking about today, and my website, drfinance.info. Thank you, folks, and appreciate all that you do and all your support. And we'll see you on the next video. Thank you, Dr. Finance.